Is Avatar Fire and Ash crashing and burning with critics? Now that reviews are out, everyone's saying a lot of the same thing. Blue people fighting the military and themselves on a distant moon in the future. That's Avatar for better or worse, and Fire and Ash is sticking with it. There are plenty of specific grievances to be found in critics' reviews, along with a good amount of praise. But what most reviews boil down to is that Fire and Ash is not surprisingly a lot more of the same stuff you've gotten in the previous two films. The rap blurbed, "The Sully family is back and they're just doing all the stuff they did last time, but slightly different and not as good." IndieWire was also unimpressed by the sameness. After pointing out how so many of James Cameron's previous films revolutionized cinema in one way or another, they concluded that Fire and Ash didn't bring the special sauce in terms of either spectacle or storytelling. It's another Avatar at the end of the day. For others though, it's not a bad thing. They showed up for an Avatar movie and that's what they got. As one reviewer who caught an early screening said, "Whatever James Cameron was smoking for Avatar Fire and Ash makes the prior two films look quaint by comparison. A maximalist, often maddening remix of everything he's done prior. It's both the best and worst version of itself." We're not sure if that's praise or not, but it's definitely accurate.
That sounds like a fun weekend, but that's not what you really want.
Throw a rock at your computer and you're bound to hit a review griping about the length of the movie. Fire and Ash is indeed the longest Avatar film so far, which is saying something because you know none of these movies are particularly short. And after sitting in the theater for 3 hours and 15 minutes, more than a few reviewers felt like they needed to talk about that. Even reviews that had a lot of good things to say about the film got stuck on the length. One person said, "While there are elements I found engaging, the film overall feels far too repetitive and far too long." Another just said simply, "These movies never need to be 3 hours long. Too much padding, dragged out melodrama, repetitive action." That's pretty much the sum of the negative reviews on the matter, although a few folks did find the silver lining, like one person who said, "Lots of setup for little payoff, but at least we get some great action sequences." Which brings us to another fairly unanimous point about the movie. No matter what critics think of the film, they did find one aspect to agree on. Fire and Ash is a dang good-looking movie. No surprise there. Both of the previous entries featured groundbreaking visual effects, and Fire and Ash continues that tradition of excellence in every way.
Show me how to make thunder.
Even IndieWire, whose review absolutely reams the threequel storytelling, found time to write, "The action is clean, massive, and staged at a level several cuts above Hollywood's usual CGI slop fests. So if you're expecting the usual high bar for spectacle, you won't be disappointed." Other reviewers said that it's gorgeous to look at and jaw-dropping. Gizmodo summed up their review with 3 words: grandeur, audacity, and insanity. On the other hand, some critics actually felt like there was too much focus on the visuals, which is an unexpected takeaway from an Avatar movie. Polygon wrote, "Cameron overinvests in the cool factor of watching Na'vis plunge into crystal-clear waters on the back of the plesiosaur-like elu." It's a fair point. It's easy to lose focus on the plot when you're dead set on packing every frame with intense visuals. Fire and Ash is a PG-13 blockbuster made for $400 million by people who really want to make that money back by getting as many people as possible to watch it. Let's just get that fact out of the way. This isn't Melancholia, but a lot of reviewers still felt that the film didn't try to push itself into any new territory. It spent its runtime playing more on the nostalgia of the previous films than taking swings that, in some critics' views, would have made it truly stand out. IndieWire's review put it bluntly enough by saying, "Fire and Ash largely devotes itself to sifting through the ruins of a world that Cameron seems half ready to leave behind." Another person wrote on X, "Ambition overcompensates for conspicuous scripting, leaving little character or plot progression." That was a fairly common theme in many of the early reviews. For all its length, it simply played it too safe.
That's right. Ava will provide. Yeah?
The dialogue often makes you cringe, and the story essentially devolves into an episode of My Two Dads meets James Cameron's take on a pyromaniac's love story. That's how one person described Fire and Ash, and they weren't alone. Cringe isn't exactly an unexpected term to find in reviews that mention the dialogue of Avatar, but Fire and Ash in particular is taking a lot of heat for it. "You okay, bro?" might be something you'd expect to hear in a high school hallway, but as plenty of reviewers pointed out, it's more than a little weird to hear it coming from an alien on a futuristic moon after a deadly firefight, even if the alien is a teenager. The BBC's review skewered the dialogue as well, writing, "Avatar Fire and Ash is a Californian soap opera in which various forgettable dreadlock surf dudes ride dragons and shout phrases like, 'That was insane, bro!' and 'This is sick, cuz!'" Other reviews pointed out that the problem isn't just that the dialogue is bad, it's that it pulls you out of the moment in scenes that are otherwise supposed to be dramatic, which in turn lowers the impact of those moments throughout the movie. With 13 years between the first and second movie, audiences had time to forget the wonders of seeing Pandora on the big screen. The Way of Water felt fairly fresh after all that time, with characters who returned like long-lost friends. But with only a few years between that one and Fire and Ash, that renewed sense of novelty just isn't there for a lot of reviewers. The Hollywood Reporter gave a scathing review that mostly fixated on the extended runtime that doesn't deliver much, saying, "Fire and Ash is sound and fury signifying nothing, or at least nothing excitingly new." As it turns out, plenty of folks felt the same. One person wrote, "Even besides rehashing Avatar 2's climax beat for beat, there's little novelty. All the tech in the world can't save it from feeling like a $900 million TV show in IMAX 3D.
That's sort of my approach and my philosophy.
Is the world just burned out on Avatar at this point? It sounds like some people are. Another early viewer took to X to write, "Avatar Fire and Ash is the first time I haven't felt at home on Pandora. The visuals are still stunning, but everything else feels like the franchise is drifting into, if you've seen one, you've seen them all territory." One surprisingly specific complaint in a lot of reviews centers on how similar the story of Fire and Ash is to The Way of Water. One review said in no uncertain terms, "Avatar Fire and Ash plays like a remake of Way of Water. Whole narratives are recycled, Zoe Saldana is sidelined, and the character advancement outside of Spider is minimal. Gorgeous to look at, but Cameron has run out of interesting things to say." That same sentiment was echoed by too many people to quote, with phrases like "repetitive bore," "pointless," and "been there, done that," getting thrown around like Halloween candy. It's actually sort of surprising the narrative stuck to so many of the same beats, considering how it was produced. For a little bit of background info, Fire and Ash was filmed back-to-back with The Way of Water, and the two films were originally two halves of the same script. You'd think that, writing them as one prolonged story, a writer would be less likely to repeat so many action beats and themes, but apparently not. Like both of the previous films, there are people who love Fire and Ash, people who hate it, and people who are happy enough to just enjoy it for what it is. Even the worst reviews out there admit that it's pretty much brainless fun. And is that such a bad thing in the end? One person wrote with, "We think, great. We all thought James Cameron was making his Star Wars, but Avatar Fire and Ash cements it as his Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy." Another reviewer was just happy to get a decent big-budget sci-fi action movie. And, well, we can't blame them. They said, "I truly love that these movies exist. There's nothing else like it. Even though a couple beats were repeated from the previous film. Whatever. For over 3 hours, I was on a different planet." When you look at it that way, yeah, Avatar is a big, action-packed thing that doesn't pretend to be anything other than a big, action-packed thing. It's a visual feast shaking hands with a mindless escape. You won't walk away from any of the movies with a radical new perspective on corporate greed or whale hunting. Those things were bad when you sat down in the theater, and they're still bad 3 hours later. They're not the point. So if you can ignore alien teenagers constantly calling each other bro and sit through a few repetitive scenes, most reviewers agree that you're going to have a heck of a time with Avatar Fire and Ash.